Minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, A Philosophical War, with Joseph Ottman.
Good evening, everyone. It's Wade Franson, your host of Created in the Image of God. I'm here tonight with one of my favorite people, a returning guest, an author who's written the first two volumes in a trilogy, launched with A Philosophical War, the founder of Middle Tree, a man with a PhD in the philosophy of religion. And as I mentioned, a repeat guest on the show. Let's welcome Joe Ottman into the studio.
Hey, thanks for having me as always, Wade. And that's super kind of you with that introduction. So thank you.
Well, it's truly a pleasure. You and I were chatting a little bit about our respective haciendas, me being here in Wisconsin, where fall is upon us, the fall colors. I was showing you some pictures of the trees because you are in a different hacienda in the Central Valley of California, where, as you mentioned, it has been a brutally hot summer, day after day of degrees in the excess of 100, and the receipt of 50 trees that you were planting over the weekend. Tell us just a little bit about that and what you're doing there with that property.
Yeah, we bought this property about 3 years ago in the Central Valley. It's a little ranch, and it had wheat all on it, and we've kind of reimagined it and put some different things onto and into it. We've got a little garden there, a little potting shed, and then, as you mentioned, we've been planting for like all of these trees. For some time now. We've been laying irrigation lines and just, because it's just all farmland out there. So we wanted to kind of spruce it up a little bit, put some trails in the property so that we can walk and ride and do whatever throughout it there. But they all, and I was there alone and had to put them all on the ground. So that's what I did.
Well, there's a tie-in here because on the one hand, we've got those super hot days. And as we all know, many, if not most, scientists that study the environment, the weather, are indicating that we are in fact facing global warming, climate change. Some of their predictions are apocalyptic. Some of the solutions that they propose are debatable. But we've talked numerous times on this show about how, according to the story in Genesis, we as a species, starting with Adam, before Eve was even created, according to the Genesis creation story, Adam was put in the Garden of Eden. He was put there to dress and keep the garden, right? So the very purpose, according to that story, for which we were put on this beautiful blue jewel floating through space, this Garden of Eden, the entire planet in that sense, metaphorically being a Garden of Eden. We were put here to care for it, to dress and keep it. All the beauty of that creation, all the differentiation of species, all the differentiated reality reflected from the divine consciousness, however we want to look at this, and we'll get into your book and the subject here in a little bit. Our primary purpose was to dress and keep it. Even before Eve was given to Adam and the commandment, be fruitful and multiply, which we've had no problem obeying that commandment. And we've become the most, invasive species this planet has ever known, to the degree that we are now perhaps threatening all life itself on this planet. So we're grounded in this idea of the soil and nature and gardens and gardening and caring for it. And in that context, I'm just really admiring the fact that you were out planting 50 trees in this former wheat field, turning it into, somewhat of a garden.
Something, yeah. I when you frame it like that, I hadn't really thought about it like that. But as you kind of, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in the time that we have today. But as you are sort of with things, you can have a plan for things. You can have an idea about how things should go, and there was a lot of that when we first bought the place, and we had concepts and ideas about what we should do. But then when you actually start to be with it and start to you actually start to spend time there, and you walk the grounds, and you feel what that place is and what it could be, by interacting with that reality, and then given over to your own imagination. You say, well, what is this, and what could it be, or what is it now that I'm here? It's really been like an adventure, and it's one we're still kind of starting. But yeah, when you put it like that, yeah, we do feel like we are stewards of that place, right? And of that particular small little parcel in the world. It's really been kind of epic to be able to shape it in a very small way, and hopefully to its and our and everyone's benefit. I will tell you that we've invited a lot of critters back into it here recently, given that the crops aren't on it anymore, and so like it got overgrown kind of with weeds and reeds, and all sorts of uninvited guests, but that were still not unwelcomed in their own right. A lot of birds, a lot of, like I said, critters. We even had some wild hogs come onto the property, which is okay, and okay and not so okay, and in some ways. But yeah, it's been an interesting to watch it transform before our eyes, and given that we're like the change agents of that, has also been kind of an interesting new role, right? So yeah, so we do have our own little garden there, and we have a literal garden there as well. So that's been a whole other ordeal.
Well,
it's not easy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to call out, we don't normally do this early, but I want to call out a comment here from Cameron Cowan, the director of publications at Soup, who has his own podcast, the Cameron Journal. Thanks for being here tonight, Cameron. He was actually on a tour visiting our property here this morning, and looking at those trees out there, and talking a little bit about some of these things. So there are a number of people already in the audience that are talking about this. We've got quite an assembled crowd here today, and so it's, when Cameron was here, gave me a little tour. We have chickens here. I let the chickens out. Cameron doesn't know this yet, but when I got to go put them back in, I'm hoping that they all made it back into the little coop. We have 15 chickens. You mentioned critters, right? We've had that battle here, trying to balance the different species, the coyotes, the raccoons, the possums, and others that want to get at those chickens. So dressing and keeping the garden and managing all this is quite a task. We've got Peace on Earth here saying, lousy gardeners we are, but we are trying. So here, and we may talk about this a little bit later, but we're turning our property here into a place where we can practice and experiment with regenerative farming, where you're actually trying to improve the soil versus just take from the soil by carefully planting different things in different ways in different times, by balancing out. You have to have animals so that you have the manure, you have to have compost. We're trying to start a food forest, which we've heard takes about 10 years to really get going. So experimenting with some of these different things because it's important, and you learn so much in introducing young people to it. So we'll get into your book, we'll get into Middle Tree, what you're doing there, but we're just sort of letting this breathe and being with it here a little bit in the opening to introduce some of these ideas and concepts of what you're doing out there in California, what we're doing here to the audience. So tell us then, aside from those planting those trees, what else have you been up to in Middle Tree? And for the audience that doesn't know you, maybe spend a moment unpacking that. I know you've been working on expanding and growing Middle Tree as an organization. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yep. So Middle Tree, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a nonprofit organization created and run by educators. Its mission and purpose is to make sure that we just changed our mission statement. Actually, we've always been doing this, but we just recently reworded it. And it's basically to make sure that every student has access to affordable education in an unlimited capacity and in a personalized fashion. So we're making sure. So for my outlook on the difficulties within the education system is basically that it comes down to a couple of things. It's overcrowded and underfunded. We all are aware that, and it really is underfunded. And then because it's underfunded, it's overcrowded, and teachers don't have the resources that they need in order to reach all the students that they can, or that they otherwise would be able to. And again,
when you say it's underfunded, I want to pause there just a moment. And I don't know if you can speak freely about this because of some of the contracts that you have with various school districts in various states, but is your view that it's completely and seriously underfunded, or that the allocation of funds is not as it should be within that system?
Well, I mean,
is it an absolute lack of funding, or is it other structural concerns that mean that the funding that's available is not delivering on the value that it could be?
Yeah, I think it's probably a mixture of both. I mean, again, we literally print money in this country, and so there's so money, and having a basic understanding of economics 101, as we all do. The more money you put out there, the less of the value of it, and we get all that. However, we send money to all sorts of different causes and all sorts of different things that we think are important. And yet I would tell you that the most important thing is our education system, because by and large, at least domestically, when we are able to, better educate ourselves and better construct our consciousness in our minds, everything else eventually will kind of come around and fix itself. However, the return on that investment takes a long time, right? It's not instantaneous at all. So you're playing a long game. So as to whether or not money that is allocated within the education system is properly done, so I really can't speak to that, to be honest with you, all that intelligently, just because I'm not in charge of the budgets per se, but we certainly see that things can sometimes maybe be a little top heavy in the education system, but it takes a lot to run these systems. But maybe this would be better elaborated by my second point, which is that the real problem with the education system, yes, it's underfunded or improperly channeled or allocated. But the real problem with the education system is that it is a system itself, and that systems exist for one reason and one reason only, and that's to obtain a result. And this is a great when you are baking a pie, or trying to drive from here to downtown, or running the triangle offense, right? Systems are great for all of those things. However, I would tell you that they're a really, really bad way to educate people. And why I say that is because systems generally don't care for the user, right? And that's why there's a system there. To bake that pie, you only need to be able to read the recipe. To drive from here to downtown, you only need to be able to drive a car and follow road signs and whatnot. And that's why systems exist. So it doesn't matter who is using them. You can just kind of fit anybody into them in any way, shape, or form. Our education system shuttles people through it. And that's kind of its point. And then when you're focused only on making sure that people are kind of just passing the test, getting the grade in the class, passing the class, getting moved into the next school grade, then your focus is kind of lost on, again, getting students to a finish line rather than working with them in ways that they need to be worked with, given who they are. Not everybody, so right now what we do is we throw a very wide net to all students and say, this is what we're going to learn today. This is how we're going to learn it. And this is the time that it's going to take to learn that. And then we're moving on. Of course, when you move on, and it's an arbitrary amount of time that we set for all of these things. It's completely arbitrary.
Or it's aligned with other systems that have nothing to do with education, right? It's within the context of the system of systems. So it might not be arbitrary. There might be reasons for it, but those reasons are arbitrary to the outcome, is perhaps what you're saying, right?
Yes and no. I mean, certainly it's a system based on a system, and we can get all into that as well. Because I would say that systemization is a great function within society, and yet heavily overutilized in a lot of ways, because we've taken away the personalization to so many things. And actually technology has kind of done a good job of sort of resetting some of that to a degree. Your cell phone, we all kind of have either an Android or an iPhone, right? And yet each phone is very, very personalized. Education could do something similar. It could say, okay, here's the lesson. Here's what we want you to learn. Now, how you learn, this, how you make that phone call or send that text, or what apps you use to get there, we don't really care. And what works best for you. And we could set up a plan, and we could do this with today's technology. We could really devise a much more personalized path and plan for students, given the current resources that we have. But we're still very stuck in this sort of industrial age mind, where everybody, again, we have the same lesson for all of our students. And where I say it's arbitrary is, of course, there's a general board of education that determines what it is that students are going to learn. But again, how quickly we move through all of those lessons, again, it's an arbitrary timeline. It's just, I think there's some backwards planning that was probably done, that we want to have all students learn A, B, and C. Well, not literal. Certainly literally A, B, and C's, but we want them to learn A, B, and C things. And that's a long list by the time that they graduate high school. And then, so that means that, their junior year, they need to have known, 1, 2, 3, and, whatever it is, the list kind of goes on and on from there. The Common Core standards were introduced almost 10 years ago now. And that was introduced because of the fact that, Alabama was, when you were in third grade in Alabama, you might have been learning something completely different than third graders were in Oregon. And the Common Core has kind of put everybody on the same timeline and learning the same things, at least all the states that have bought into it. I think there are something like 45 or 46 states that currently participate in it. But at least that now has everybody on a timeline, regardless of how arbitrary it still might be. But again, this is the problem with the system, is the system determines what it is that you should be doing within it, so that you can obtain the goal of that system. But I would again contend that the goal of our education system is not to actually, it doesn't really care about what students get from it and what they retain, who they understand themselves to be given their education, and what they understand their relationship to the world to be, and how they might be able to impact, influence, and benefit that world and their relationship to it because of that education. Right now, we more or less, and I think we're getting better about this, but more or less this is still the case, that our education system says, you've got to learn this, don't ask questions, here's the lesson, test on Tuesday, and then after you take the test and pass the class and pass it, you can forget what you learned. And I always say that I will give you a perfect example of this by asking you, who is the third president of the United States? What does a cell membrane do? What is terminal velocity? These are basic questions, and you're not stupid because you don't know them. It just goes to point out the fact that our education system doesn't really care, at least in this country, what it is that you learn, what you know, what you learn, why you've learned it, why you've taught it. It wants you to learn stuff. It's rote memorization and the regurgitation of information. It wants you to learn stuff and then forget. It doesn't care. And then you can forget it and never have to deal with that ever, ever, ever again. And to me, that's totally pointless. Why have us go through all this rigmarole if we're never going to understand what the meaning of all of that is? And again, how that impacts our lives, how that impacts our society, how that informs who we are as people, so that we can better understand, again, ourselves and our relationship to the world. So when you have a system, and again, it is a system that is only concerned with its own ends, then of course it's not going to care about the experience of the user. And of course, you're not going to get out from that what you were hoping to get from it. Even those students who, the valedictorians of the world, I'm not sure that they're in it for the right reasons. A lot of those folks, and I'm going to call them out here, but they're just, they're in it because they want to be the best, or they want to, I'm not sure that we've encouraged enough, and it's not even their fault. I don't think we put enough emphasis on learning for learning's sake. There's so much competition in our education system. There's so much there's such a lack of collaboration. And of course, when you get out of school, life is not just a competition. There is a collaborative happening within life, and again, your relationship to the world. We don't teach that. We don't care about that. And so, of course, it's no coincidence, I think, that we have a society that is so competitive, that is so kind of cutthroat, that cares only about reaching an end, and doesn't take time to saturate itself within what it is doing here at a present moment and for its own sake, and why that might be meaningful. So I think that all starts with and that was I guess the whole point of being on here is to be on a soapbox in a way, but I'll kind of step down from it. But again, when you have a system, any kind of system, its sole purpose is to obtain a result and to obtain an end, to obtain a goal. What is the goal and purpose of our the question about what the goal and purpose of our education system is currently needs to be heavily reevaluated and scrutinized.
Well, so thank you. And there's so many thoughts, I could comment on. One being, I don't know who the third president is or exactly what terminal velocity is. I do know what a cell membrane does.
I don't know. Yeah.
I do know what a cell membrane does because I had a particular interest in that.
Okay.
For personal reasons. So yeah, I also want to help the audience let some of the things that you've just said breathe a little bit by saying, my experience with the educational system was so horrific. In my high school yearbook, I wrote, you're supposed to say, what's your impression of high school or your biggest memory? And I'm like, and I wrote in my yearbook, the most horrifying waste of time I've ever experienced in my life. That's what high school was for me, right? And I took 2.5 years off and went to college, and eventually then, got my feet grounded in education. And I desperately needed it because I did nothing in high school. I hated it so much. But anyway, so I was terrified of what I would do to my own kids. And we looked at different options. And for the first time, I'd never seen this. I went to a Montessori school. And I'm not saying that Montessori is the answer here, by the way, but I want to just share a different thing here. When I went into this Montessori school, I saw 30 kids actively engaged in their own learning. And I saw the teacher sort of floating around, guiding and helping the kids gently, but all the kids were engaged in their own individual deep learning process, just gently guided. And they were walking around the classroom, knew what they were doing. It was peaceful and harmonious. And I literally cried because I had a 3-year-old daughter and I was terrified of what I was about to do to her by putting her into the educational system, right? And we didn't want to homeschool. That has its pros and cons, and that was the answer for us. Now, it didn't work as well for our son, but I feel it was beautiful for our daughter. And one of the things they do, and this is where I want to let it breathe a little bit, one of the things they do that's fundamentally different is they have first, second, and third grade together in a classroom. They have 4th, 5th, and 6th grade together in a classroom. They have first, second, and third year students in each of those classrooms. And the third year students are helping the first year students in their learning process. And because of all this helping going on and this cooperation, each child has a lot more freedom and support to explore education in their own way on their own terms. It's more individualized by nature of the system. The outcome perhaps is a little clearer, a little different than the industrialized systemic system that you're talking about. And for the audience and for you, I taught 4th and 5th grade in California for a couple of years, getting my emergency teaching credential. When I resigned from the ministry, I first went into teaching. And that again was a horrific experience that only, made my fear even worse. Now I saw it from the perspective of a teacher in California and how I was expected to act and behave with teaching the students within that system.
Yeah, I would make the argument that teachers are probably the biggest victims of the system of anybody, or you could make that argument anyways, because most teachers get into the profession to do a lot of good and to influence, young minds and to spread their love.
And I loved that part of it, but then the whole administration and the principal and the approach, and it was just
a lot of politics and red tape, and again, but they are all under the same kind of pressures from the same system.
Not blaming any individual, right? They are all within the system. So, but let's put a fork in this piece of it. I want to go to a quick commercial break in which we're actually going to show a little video about MiddleTree, because a picture's worth 1,000 words. So this little video is moving pictures and text, so it's probably worth 10,000 words, to give everyone a little insight into who you are and what you do in terms of your role as the founder of MiddleTree. Don't go anywhere. We're going to come right back and dig into more philosophical, spiritual, religious principles as we begin to work through this topic and the life and times of Mr. Joseph Atman. We'll be right back.
MiddleTree got started by a group of educators who wanted to see education done in a different way.
Socioeconomic status is the primary factor in whether a person is admitted to college at present. And we think that that is simply, unfair. And so our mission is to work against that by allowing people from less privileged backgrounds access to the tools that people from more privileged backgrounds are able to have.
The programs that we offer here are tutoring, college counseling, ACT and SAT test prep, and our summer seed program. The tutoring program is unlike any other on the planet that I'm aware of, in that we allow students to be here on a membership basis. Students can come as often as they'd like to without an appointment, and they can be here for as long as they want to.
I really like helping kids understand things that they have been told that they're not good at.
In 6th grade, that's when I noticed my grades started to go up, especially in math. That's usually where I need my help.
I prefer to be able to just have fun with the kids in a way that inspires them to want to learn more and to have fun while they're learning.
The way they do it here, they just have that vibe, if they make it fun.
We don't have a system here. We don't have a workbook. We don't have an actual program. We have individual students, and we approach each and every individual student as individuals.
I love to go finish my homework so I can go home, chill, and just play video games or something like that.
What MiddleTree did for me was it gave me back my time after dinner or before dinner to do things with my son that let me be mom. It gave me back my mom time.
I came here and I finished the year with a B in math, which came up from an F, which I totally think is because of this place. I had A's and B's completely.
We really want to make sure that we're reaching people on their levels.
If you don't understand something, they will help you until you feel comfortable with it.
I like to empower my students to use their voices.
They want you to ask questions, and they want you to learn better than you ever did before.
Really, all we really want are for our kids to be healthy and happy. And I think MiddleTree embraces each kid being their best self, being their individualized self.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God with your host, Wade Franson, and Joseph Atman, founder of MiddleTree. So, Joe, that video was created a couple of years ago. You mentioned changing the mission statement a little bit. I saw at the beginning there some elements of sort of, helping the students, in a sense, teaching to the test, making sure they meet those academic standards. Have you further developed the program and the approach, or is that still a pretty good representation of what you do?
It's still a really good representation of what we do. And so what has changed about us really since the creation of that video and that messaging is that we've been able to service a lot more school district partners, and a lot more just other nonprofit partners, cities, anybody who really needs any academic assistance or programming, regardless of what kind of entity they might be. We're really facilitating that end of it at a much larger scale now than we were before. But so we've and COVID changed a lot of that for us. Because schools, especially schools, needed so much more help. And so we sort of transformed and became this sort of full service organization that partnered up with school districts and, got into what it was that they needed, just general help and assistance with, largely in in school academic support, and then to a even greater degree after school programming. So we run a bunch of after school programs now. That's probably the main thing that we do. However, the heart of what we do, and because you can't always, when you're working with a partner, just like in any relationship, you can't always do what you want to do all the time, right? You have to kind of, be of service to their ends and expectations as well, and what they're hoping for. And every school district we've seen is different. Even within districts, every school we've seen wants something a little different. So we try and cater as best we can to that. But the heart of what we do is still very much alive in what that video represents. But we'd like to kind of regenerate that now. We saw a lot of students obviously go online during the pandemic, and then we thought they were all going to come back to centers after the pandemic, and that wasn't quite the case at as large or great of a clip as we were hoping for. So we've really put a lot of effort into getting human beings back in the door and working with them face to face now. This is really the first year that we've kind of gone full blown back into those efforts, coupled with all the school district partnerships that we have now. So really trying to see more students face to face and really live that whole mission of giving. So what I just described about the problem with the endemic problem within the school system as it being a system, we're saying, well, what if we had a place that allowed for a personalized education, that allowed students to have whatever time that they needed and wanted in order to be able to facilitate that personalized education? And then what if we gave everyone access to it, regardless of their capacity financially? So that's what we're doing. And that's what we're still doing with partners as well. But again, when they want, for us to be at 15 schools within their district, well, we need to, house that many staff, and there's a price tag for that with, our programs.
I was about to ask, because some of what you're describing, and based on what I know of your book, your work, your philosophy, you mentioned it in your property and being with the property. You're also being with these schools individually. You're being with the kids, and you're responding to the reality as you see it. So how does that work? Because some degree of systemization and structure is needed for Middletree to function effectively as a company. So how do you balance that need to be with the specific situation and yet still have it work from a business perspective within the world as it exists around us?
Yeah, because the unfortunate reality is, and this is kind of a saying I picked up from my uncle, actually, who was a CEO at two publicly held companies. And, I'm running this nonprofit. I don't know anything about business at all. I'm a theologian, like, as you are well aware of. Knew nothing about running a business when I started this. Debatable as to how much I know about running one now, but that's another story. Where he says, no margin, no mission. Right. And he told me that, quite a lot out of the gate. Right. And it's so like, okay, I still got to play by some of the rules. Right. And we have to make some money. So we do have to abide by that. We do have to kind of run this as a business. However, I'll tell you, the first couple of years, none of us really got a paycheck. At least, certainly not a consistent one. I don't think I got paid for the first 3 or 4 years here, and then our staff only was able to kind of scrounge some paychecks together, and they stuck with us remarkably for a long time to get this off the ground. And so we've had to try and kind of be creative in some of the things that we were doing at first. We really operated just on volunteerism, and that created this great spirit of community, and that we were all here for some kind of greater good, right? And but the problem with that is, of course, when people are volunteering, they only have the time that they have, of course, right? And so that's difficult to maintain a consistency. So playing within the margins there, we do still have to have a business structure, especially now that we're beholden to all these different partnerships and all these different people that are counting on us. I think it's currently something like 23 or 400 families currently work with Middletree, and or vice versa. So we're supporting this swath of people that all have various different needs, and so we're again, it's kind of this coupling of working with our partners and still carrying out the mission that is near and dear to us. And so how to best do that within certain parameters are always what we're looking at. But it's, as I mentioned in that video, we don't really even have a program per se. We sort of focus on individual students, assess what it is that they need, and put a plan together based on it's not an assessment like we give them a test or anything. We have students on what we call Middletree plans that are kind of like individualized educational plans that the school districts use, those IEPs. But
so is it more like consultation with the student, with their parents?
Yeah.
That you arrive at that based on more of qualitative discussions versus quantitative testing and analysis.
Exactly. And it's a living, sort of breathing movement, right? Every day that we're going to work with a student, we're going to sort of, maybe change the course a little bit, or go full speed ahead if there are things that are working. But we always want to keep in mind that it's a moving target, obviously, and that we're working with human beings and trying to facilitate what they need on 2 different levels, both academic and human levels. We want to take care of the human being, and then the academic stuff will follow also. So that's an approach that we try and take as best we can as well. And that kind of tends to happen once we build those relationships and once we figure out, who's best suited for what it is that we're doing here. And that takes some time and some sorting, and because again, we're just trying to reach people on their own levels. That's really, really what we're trying to do, which is impossible to do when you have a very rigid system or a very rigid program. So,
yep. Well, I want to bring in a comment here as we pivot a little bit from Makai Abdus Salam, whom we've also had on the show. Welcome to the audience there, Makai. How does your program coincide with theology or the religious or spiritual needs of society? And now I want to pivot a little bit into your work as an author. You're working now to reissue the first book in your trilogy, Philosophical War, and you've got the second. Is there a working title for the second volume yet of that trilogy?
For the second volume's complete. It's called The Old Systems.
The Old Systems.
Got it.
So Philosophical War was the first one, The Old Systems. And in that book, A Philosophical War, you dive deep into the Garden of Eden story and your analysis there of what was going on. Unpack that for Makai and the rest of the audience briefly, because that's behind, that underpins that philosophy. And you have a PhD in the philosophy of religion. That's there under the surface. That's the soil in which the roots of the Middletree organization is growing, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. So, I mean, a very quick synopsis I could give of a philosophical war, that project in general.
Well, actually, before we do that, I think let's quickly pivot to a commercial break, because then we're going to watch this video anyway about the book,
right.
and then you can comment on that. So don't go anywhere, especially Makai and the rest of the audience. We'll be right back after this video.
In a world where the battle of minds goes unnoticed, one man dared to challenge the very structure of consciousness itself. Joseph Ottman proudly presents the first part of his groundbreaking collected work, A Philosophical War. Ottman's mission is to expose humanity's most elusive adversary, the structure of its own consciousness. He argues that the modern human condition is plagued by a thought process that inflicts unnecessary suffering. This thought process, like a stealthy enemy, wages war against our nature. Ottman's quest is both daring and revolutionary, to overthrow and replace the current prevailing conscious structure. He identifies the enemy within and seeks a more coherent and powerful ally. With digestible bursts of epistemological guerrilla strikes, he pierces the lines of everyday thought patterns. This counteroffensive offers a new perspective, one that challenges the way we perceive reality. Ottman asserts that humanity's consciousness has relied too heavily on thought alone. He introduces being with, a relationality that harmonizes humanity with the world around us. But the battle doesn't end there. Ottman reinterprets the early chapters of Genesis. He calls for the removal of contemporary notions of God while offering a profound argument for God's existence. Filled with intrigue, simplistic insights, and mystical yet realistic hope, this book is a potential landmark work. A Philosophical War by Joseph Ottman. Available at Amazon.
Welcome back. Over to you, Joe.
So yeah, there are so many ways to approach this, but basically what that sort of little tidbit was kind of giving us a glance at is that the whole project of A Philosophical War rests on the notion that I believe quite fervently that that we as a human consciousness have relied way too heavily on ideas and concepts, and that we take ideas as though they are realities. You have an idea about something and you put that in your head that your idea is what actually is. And then we operate as a consciousness, both individually and as a society, as a grander form of consciousness in general. We operate as though the ideas that we have are realities themselves, when we actually very well know that whatever realities we do have, or whatever ideas we do have, do not match up to the reality itself. We all know that, and yet we almost always operate as, in the opposite direction. So that is quite simply the general thesis of the book, is that we've pigeonholed our minds. We've painted ourselves in this proverbial corner by saying that we have to conceptualize, understand things through this lens of ideology, concept and notion of, and not, as the commercial just alluded to, this idea that, or this concept that I introduced, and I use that word loosely, concept and idea, but this approach of being with. So rather than have an idea of, we need to have more being with. And we talked about before, we had ideas about what we wanted to do with our property up in the Central Valley, but it wasn't until we were actually able to walk the ground itself. Well, it wasn't until that wheat was disked for the first time, we got to get out there and walk around and see. I didn't even know there were some curvatures and some hills where they actually were, because the crops hid all that. And what was unveiled when we actually got to be right up with that gave us a totally different picture of what the thought that we had about it, even when we would just sit and look at it from, not that far of a distance. When we actually spend time with realities, when we take away ideas and take away concepts that we have about anything and just observe, a whole new experience opens up and unfolds for us. However, and this is where we get into the Garden of Eden stuff. My interpretation of that, and that book is not necessarily a religious or a theological one per se, but I use that as an example because it's such a familiar story to most of the world, regardless of your religious background. Is that story about a original humanity, Adam and Eve, who were in this garden, who were in such alignment with the world itself, with phenomena, with being, such alignment with the world that they could communicate with God directly. They didn't need any altars or any priests or any religion or any concept. There was direct communication with God itself. And again, I think whether you take this story to be evangelically true or just a metaphor and allegory doesn't matter. But what happened was, and in a very strange passage within Genesis, God says, let them not eat from the tree lest they be like us. Well, what happens is they do, of course, as we know, eat from the tree, and they gain knowledge, which you would think would be a good thing. Because normally, I think when we're all trying to, in our education system, this will all circle back here in a minute, in our education system, we're trying to gain knowledge to have an understanding about the world. And just like what we talked about, what our school system doesn't do that well is really the point of education, or really what should be the point of education, is to understand who we are and why we are the way that we are, and to really have this communication with the world as it is. And yet, and that all takes, an understanding of and a getting to know of and an education in a way. And yet, when original humanity got this information, when they ate from this tree, they had all this knowledge, and then were all of a sudden at odds with the world. And again, that's a very strange thing to get
at odds with the divine,
with everything and themselves, right? Adam was angry at Eve for making him eat from the apple and being, having his eyes open. And again, why wouldn't God want its creation to have knowledge and to have understanding in this way? And again, whether you say this is allegorical or evangelical, the point here is that it's such an interesting story. And also it's very interesting that God didn't say, don't look at the tree, don't touch the tree, don't smell the tree, whatever. It said, don't eat from the tree. What happens when you eat something? You take something outside of you and you make it a part of you. And not only do you make it a part of you, it sustains you, it nourishes you, it gives you further life. And I think that we too frequently use concepts to, again, sustain us, to nourish us. We take that as what actually, again, we take those ideas as realities, and then we feed on that. But that's not true nourishment. It's really kind of a poison in the long run that is going to do anything but nourish us. And we again, I think that why that story was utilized in this book was to demonstrate that somewhere we've taken a wrong turn. And any philosophy class that you take at any point will hit on this topic at some point, is that human beings are out of alignment with the natural order of the world. Cats don't question what it is to be a cat, right? They don't question what the meaning of life is. They don't, that just things happen and they just go about their daily lives. We as human beings are constantly struggling with ourselves, with being itself, with other humans, with all of these different interactions. And we have to ask ourselves, what was it that disjoined us from the world? And again, if you're going to read into, that original story of humanity in the West, anyways, this Genesis story, it is that human beings had eaten from this tree, gained all this knowledge, and they had, again, instantly conceptual knowledge about things. They had shame right away. They had these abstract ideas that they took as reality. The first thing they did, again, according to the story, was they covered themselves because they realized they were naked, put a literal barrier between themselves and the phenomenological world. And that is something that, again, evangelically or allegorically, I think is really important, because not only did we see, or do we, and still to this day, feel naked and feel like we have to put these barriers between ourselves and cover ourselves to better interact with the world. But that gives us comfort in and of itself, when our true and natural state doesn't really require that per se. So again, there's a lot to unpack there, but it kind of comes down to the fact that we rely far too heavily on conceptual modes of thinking, and we've formed a whole consciousness around those modes of ideology, concept, notion, idea itself, and taken those as realities and operated in that fashion. And I would contest that that is the most dangerous thing that a consciousness of any kind could do.
Well, there's so much there, and of course I've read this book, studied it, provided some editorial feedback initially, working with you now to reissue it, and I think that's an amazing, relatively short unpacking of it. So in the second volume now, you're going into could you refresh us on what that title is again?
Yeah, it's called The Old Systems, and
The Old Systems.
Yeah.
So where do you take this then? And to preface it, when we talked about this book through the first, working through it some time ago, I highlighted that to me, you really brought out the idea of why that commandment is so important from Moses. And you didn't address this at all in your book, but to me, it spoke to me in this way, where God said, thou shalt have no other false gods before me. Thou shalt not make any graven image, no idols, to bow down to them and worship them. And these false concepts of reality, they are exactly that. They are a false idol. They are a conception of reality, of God, of consciousness, that is of our own making. And we do, in fact, bow down and worship them. We make ourselves slaves to those ideas, right? Yeah. Yes. So now it's almost like that's the cancer, and this cancer then metastasizes into systemic forms. Is that fair in terms of where you're going with the second book?
Perfect, man. Because what I just kind of laid out, and I get so flustered in talking about it when I'm trying to just summarize it really quickly, because again, it's a book, right? But it's also very simple, because the idea is a simple one. But to give you the full picture, I try and go at it from all angles. But so the way that you just worded it is so perfect, is that exactly you have this little cell of a cancerous happening that is benign, probably actually at first, and then it does metastasize into all of these other things and all of these other different manifestations. And what I lay out in part 2 is talking about how actually language itself is the first place where we get misled about everything, right? Because I can tell you something, and language actually acts as matter. And why, I can tell you, something, I can give you, something that I say that's totally arbitrary. Wade, I don't like your shirt or whatever. You can choose to react to that, whatever, even though I think we're pretty much wearing the same shirt, just a different color.
No, but my color is much better than yours, Joe.
It is a much better color. And I should have been more mindful that I was going to be on camera today, and was like, I wasn't. But I can say something to you and you can have a reaction to that. So you react to an idea, to language that I'm saying that has no real value. You give it value because of the belief and the meaning that you think that my words have. And so words themselves act as matter. But language itself, I say in the first part of the book that I think that we should just strike the word God from language, period, because no one has any idea what we're talking about when we talk about God. Your definition is different than your wife's definition, than your neighbor's definition, than your priest's definition, than the person who is a totally different religion from you, from the atheist. No one has any idea what we're talking about when you say the word God, because we've never sat down and defined that term exactly what it is, and no one can really agree on it. So I say, let's just get rid of that word. Let's just, I'm not saying get rid of the idea, the reality. You can't get rid of the reality. We need to just stop with the whole what is, or God, period, because no one has an idea of again what we're talking about when we say that word. So I strike that.
Well, this appealed to me, even though obviously the last thing I would ever do is get rid of God. The title of this show is Created in the Image of God.
And I'm not saying get rid of God. I'm just saying get rid of the word, because nobody.
But this resonated with me instantly, because my own experience was the world, the universe, the little perfect hermetically sealed world that I was in for a decade or more, in my belief system within my church group. Incredibly motivated. You mentioned that Middle Tree was successful because people were working without a paycheck, right? They were pouring their lives into this thing, their whole being. They were serving the growth of Middle Tree, and they got it off the ground. And we were all in this beautiful hermetically sealed bubble that shattered and split right down the middle over an argument about the nature of God. This global denomination that was doing all these amazing things. We were, most of us were so enthusiastic about this, devoting our lives to it, ripped apart because of a debate about the nature of God.
Mm-hmm. And again, pointless. Well, but maybe it's not pointless, right? But no one,
it was from a because the point is, there is no way of knowing. I mean, it had to do with the Trinity, right? It had to do with the theological construct. Nobody was being with the idea. They were arguing from their ideology. You follow me?
Exactly. And that's the point, right? Is that's what we can't do if we want to actually move forward, right? You can't just have your own thoughts and your own ideas about something and then just argue that point, because that's really just an ego stance, right? There's a comment out here that says, maybe it's, maybe ideas become reality. Yes, for sure. And actually, if you read the book, I say exactly that, is that ideas are their own realities. Everything is a reality. It's just that the problem with ideas is that if they're only yours, well, then that's a problem, potentially, right? If you act in a certain way that's not in step with other people's actions or what's out there in the world, if you have an idea that you can, run through a wall, the reality is that, you might not, you have to have a real strong belief probably to get through that wall. That if you have any, and this is precisely the point, is that your thoughts actually can influence, they do influence reality. They influence what reality is. It's just that you don't even have a clear idea about your own thoughts. And so we're kind of jumping way ahead, but that's okay, because that's what we're here to talk about anyways, is that our minds are so powerful that thoughts themselves are realities. It's just that we are so misconstrued in our own thinking in what it is that we believe, and how we've gotten to those beliefs, and why we believe those things, and what ideas we actually have about whatever it is, that we don't have a clear understanding of the idea itself, right? So the ideas that we have, we don't even know why we have them. And so that's why we get really confused. And that was, again, you want to go back to Genesis, that's the whole thing, right? They've got an idea about this. They understand it. They just don't know why they understand it in the way that they do. And that's the problem.
I've got to throw out an idea here that, and this may well be my own idea and from my own study and theology and everything, but maybe it's helpful, because we spent enough time talking about the Genesis story. I want to fast forward to the Apostle Paul, who made this statement to the Corinthian church, and students of the Bible know this. But people may not have correlated these two things, right? So the statement to the Corinthian church was a church with all these problems, especially a lot of bickering and arguing, right? Paul at one point said, comparing yourselves among yourselves, you are not wise. Be careful lest you devour one another. And there were these ideas about false gods and idols swirling around, and all these things going on. And he made this comment. He said, you're not mature, right? You are children. You have yet to relearn the basics. And he says, you're still drinking milk. And then he says, Strong meat belongs to those who by reason of use have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. So he evokes the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but in a positive way. And he says, you should by now be discerning good and evil. And to me, this goes back to the point that you were making about, should be a good thing that they took of this fruit, that they wanted to become like God. But they weren't ready. They were immature. They were captured, enraptured by the ideas. We have the serpent. You might imagine the Jungle Book and Mowgli and Khan, right? The snake hypnotizing Mowgli, right? We become hypnotized and entrapped by our own ideas, our own idle fancies and vain imaginations, is a quote frequently used in the Baha'i faith, to throw a Baha'i thing out there. But Paul is basically saying, hey, it's time for us to grow up and benefit from the capacity that we got from that tree by reason of use, exercising our senses to discern good and evil. This to me evokes the whole idea of being with, right? Experiencing reality. And of course, we're given our senses. That's where we experience it through. That's how we can interact with, understand, and relate to reality. But it doesn't say, be taught. I mean, it does say you have need that somebody teach you again the basics, but here the idea is your own discernment, through seeing it through your own eyes. Again, a Baha'i quote, the second hidden word, justice, seeing it through your own eyes and not through the eyes of others. This idea of discernment being there to help analyze these systems, analyze these ideas, prove the spirits, test the spirits is another thing. So my point is, there's a lot of the answers to this are in fact contained in the Bible and in scripture and in holy writings around the world as well. Just kind of wanted to throw that out there, but you have to dig deep into the soil and you have to discern.
It's such a great point, Wade, because this isn't a new problem, right? This is literally, I don't think that, again, Genesis was arbitrarily chosen to start, the whole big book, right? And not just because it starts in a linear fashion with, at first, there was nothing, right? And it quickly moves into, well, then there were human beings, and human beings, had this disjointed relationship with their own creation. I think that there's a really good reason for that. It's the original difficulty. It's what ushers in death itself. It actually is these concepts and notions that we have an understanding about things that is not how they actually are. And that's really the whole point of religion itself, is to get a better understanding, to get a better orientation with the world and with ourselves. It's exactly what I was talking about that education should be, that it isn't. That education in a formalized system, the way that we do it in this country, gives students ideas about things, but it doesn't let them experience things for themselves. And what's the best way to really learn anything? And so this is where it all ties together, is through experience, is through doing that thing, through being with it, through failing. Failing is the best way to learn. It's the best way to learn. But of course, in our education system, we don't allow for failure. Failure is a terrible thing. You can't fail, or else you can't advance, right? And that is true. But in the education system, failure is you can't do it. But in life, failing is not an end.
Yeah, you get the big F, you're never getting into college.
Right. Oh my gosh. Or whatever, right? Like,
you have a junior in high school right now. We're
grappling with that. But as we know as adults and in real life,
she's thankfully she's getting straight A's. But my point is, it's a focus. It's an intense pressure cooker.
Yeah. But again, in real life, when you fail, that's not the end. I mean, it shouldn't be the end. It should be a new starting point for you. Exactly. That's not always easy to do, but it usually the greatest successes come out of the greatest failures. And
Joe, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and those failures are the things that steel us and metal us and make us who we are, and then we can take and build on that and become better because of it, only through failure. And well, that was really all I was going to say on that. But it's an important part of the process. And I don't know, we should be less afraid to fail, because I think here's maybe the final put a bow on it, is that we think when we fail that we have an understanding about what happened, but we don't, because we only have an idea about what we thought it is to fail. The reality is if you keep pushing on, something else is going to avail itself, right? So it's that mindset that we always have, because it's like we have concepts about the way that things are, when the ideas we have are almost never the way that it really is. So that was what I did.
Well, I'm looking at the clock, and this has been awesome. We're already at the hour. I've got an ad I've got to play for one of our sponsors tonight, who's actually been in the audience patiently, Cameron Cowan. Do you have time to still go a little bit after that? Yeah. Awesome. Because we don't want to be too rigid and structured here and systematic. We'll be right back, everyone, after this brief commercial break. Don't go anywhere.
Millennials are America's largest, most educated generation in American history. A generation of ambition, education, and progress facing an uncertain reality. Born into an era of economic chaos, they face challenges far beyond what they were told to prepare for. They've had to rethink traditional milestones as they enter adulthood during global uncertainty. Their struggles mirror those of a generation before them, Japan's lost generation. The same story, different country, different time. America's lost generation goes beyond the numbers to capture the unique ways this generation is reshaping their future, in their own words. It's a story of real people, authentic challenges, and untold resilience. Explore the stories and reflections of America's Lost Generation by Cameron Cowan. Available now at soupllc.com.
I thought that was a fitting segue too, as we were talking about systems adapting. I'm got this image going through my head of our life, right? Because you mentioned the notion of death also entering in the Garden of Eden story, and the tree there. So you have this, very young baby, child, anything in nature that's young is going through this rapid growth. We know from childhood development that there's a super learning phase, right? Where, it's just limitless possibilities and imagination and creativity and growth. And, with anything that's healthy, that growth is just amazing. But then you get to, sort of maturity, and you get this almost vision of, sort of the things settling in, or as the talking heads said, David Byrne, I can feel my lifetime piling up, right? The accumulation of those ideas. And these visions, dreams turn into isms, right? And ideologies that then constrain us and make our worldview more rigid. And then you kind of get this atrophy phase where things no longer work. So it just seems to be in the cycle of reality itself to teach us this lesson.
But it's our reality that we're creating, right? Through our understanding about it, or our misunderstanding of it, because there's no barrier between ourselves and what is. There's no barrier, only ourselves. And if we allow ourselves to, again, have simple and direct access to whatever it might be, unhindered by our own ideas about it. Like, if you can get rid of yourself, your past, your thoughts, and simply observe what is, you will have a completely and totally new experience with something that you have looked at 10,000 times, right? But it's that process of unhinging from your experiences.
I'm thinking of that joke, right, about the Buddhist retreat in which it's all fun and games until somebody loses an eye.
Right, there you go. Yeah.
Right, the barriers that we create and erect around ourselves.
It's like a dad Buddhist joke right there. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, but that's what it is, right? It's always the encasing that we wrap around ourselves that is going to be that barrier. And frequently that encasing is kind of made of glass. We don't see it ourselves at all, and yet it still keeps us at a distance and degree from, again, period, from whatever. The process of deconstructing that is a really difficult one, and it's one that frequently we don't want to give up, because when you sacrifice that, you sacrifice your identity and all the things that you understand about, again, yourself and the world. And that's okay. It's okay to want to hold on to those things. As a matter of fact, it's healthy. In fact, I once was told by a Buddhist monk, when I asked him, what's the real problem with having an ego? And he said to me, if you have too much of an ego, you die. And I said, what happens if you have too little of an ego? He says, you die. So, it's always about finding a balance, right? And that really is it, right? I thought it was genius. I thought it was such a genius thing to say. And I've never forgotten it. So it's okay to have some of that, but again, striking that balance is a difficult thing to do. And if you can pierce through it and observe things just as they are without you even being there, there's a good question is, if you're just in pure observation, is there really a self at all? Or is there just observation of?
Yep.
Right. So, and it kind of comes down to, who are you? Who is the agent of you? What is that constructed of? It's not just biological. It's not just your past. It's not just who, obviously your job and your relationship to the world. It's something far beyond that. I would argue that everything is simply consciousness in different forms. But what is consciousness? Well, it's an observation and a relationship of and to. But if in a timeless sort of way, if we are just here and now, and that is all that is, what are we really if we can forget everything else and just be and observe? That's a strict way to instant, but probably short enlightenment.
Well, I'd like to sort of come full circle on this, right? So you had talked about in the educational system, when we were talking about that at the beginning, that the whole system exists to produce an outcome, right? And the question is, what is that outcome, right? So what is our purpose on Earth? While we're here in this phase of existence, because every religion would agree with this generalized statement. They'd have different ways of expressing it. But we have a period of time here between our birth and our death. It's only a phase of existence, right? Whether there was something before, every religious idea is that there is something after. There's some purpose for this phase of existence. So during this phase of existence, what outcome do we want? What should we hope to gain, to use that word, from this experience between birth and death?
What are the lessons that we want to learn? Why are we focused on that? I would tell you that almost everything that we focus on, every experience that we have, has come about by any number of choices that we've made. And those choices have been because we've wanted to focus primarily on something. And we've wanted to go in that direction. And so why is the real question. Why have we chosen the choices that we've made? Why have we chosen to focus on the things that we do? What are the lessons that we're trying to teach ourselves? Because ultimately, it's just us dealing with oneself, dealing with oneself. And then ironically, you can say, because that's the case, there really is no self, right? We're all just sort of one reflection of what is, of creation, of being, of God, of whatever.
But I'm observing and being with Joseph Atman right now. So my question is, well, Joseph Atman, what are you, or why is your motivation focused around MiddleTree, for example? You've devoted a significant portion of your time, energy, your observational powers, your being with experience to that. So why?
Because of everything that we've kind of talked about here today. And I appreciate that question, because I think that it's so important to re-educate the human mind. And what better way to do that than to start with those minds that are most sponge-like and malleable. And
so root cause analysis, and I've spent some time in the IT world and debugging and whatever. Okay, you ask why 5 times. Okay, so why is it important to help those minds? I'm going to maybe dig down like 3 or 4 or 5.
Let's go.
So why is it important to reach those minds, to help those minds think differently?
Because we don't want people writing in their yearbooks it was the biggest waste of time in their life, right?
What's wrong with that?
No time here should be a waste, right?
Are you invalidating my experience?
No, not at all. But nobody should feel like they wasted, any time whatsoever. And we want to make sure that students love learning. The people love learning.
But this is a chance for me to reiterate one of my favorite sayings. If you cannot be a good example, you can at least serve as a horrifying warning, right? and for me, high school was a horrifying warning and a big wake-up call. I woke up from the hangover of high school, 1.5, 2 years later. Thankfully, it wasn't too late, and I got my butt to a college institution in a situation that kind of saved my life. But that's a whole nother Oprah. But so why? So rephrase that in not such a personalized way to me, right? Why re-educate those minds? What? Because that's like, okay, so you want to transform the system, but that's different from what you said. Why do you want to re-educate that mind? So in other words, if you had worked with me, then I guess what you're saying is then my high school experience would not have been a waste, because you would have turned that around for me and I would have dug into it and gotten something out of it. I don't think it would have been possible at that point. I think I had to learn and experience and be with myself in a way that to wake myself up. It wasn't something somebody else could do for me, and I had to do it by wasting my high school years and blaming other circumstances for my misery.
And I think that that's an important lesson, for you, right? Obviously, like you said, you had to go through that in order to learn it. And we all have to understand why we're focused on the things that we are, and why we've had the experiences, and why we've taken from those experiences what we've taken from them, because we're trying to teach ourselves something. Clearly,
I could give a million reasons and blame a million other things as to why and how it wasn't my fault and all that, and how I was set up and abandoned and mistreated, and I was just raising my middle finger at the world around me because the world had so badly mistreated me, right? But then the realization that I was only hurting myself came around in a big way. But anyway, but still, why does Joseph Atman want to help those minds?
I think because he sees his own journey as one that could have also been similarly avoided. It took a teacher my senior year of high school to kind of knock me out of my lull and turn me on to philosophy and religion and make me understand what I loved. Not just, but from an academic lens, but then again, it informed who I was as a person. And gosh, I think about, what if I had discovered that so much earlier on? What if I had that fostered and nurtured within me at an earlier time. And I think what could we do in a person's life if we could help them find that for themselves? I didn't want to, confessionally here, I didn't want to, start working with kids. When I first came up with an idea to have an education nonprofit, I was like, I don't want to work with kids. I didn't just go get a doctorate degree to just work with, in philosophy of all things and religion, to work with kids about this topic. And now after doing it for as long as we have, I'm like, man, there are no more important audience that we could be touching here.
Amen. I spent my life working with them too. So that's the second why. Here's the third why. The first why, whatever that was, why Middle Tree, and then why is it important to educate minds? Now digging one question deeper, why did that awakening and that study of philosophy at that moment in time, why was that so attractive to you? Why did it so deeply engage you?
It's a really good question. I think that it did because it hit me in a way unlike any other experience I had academically. Like, I thought English class was okay. That we read some books in there that kind of spoke to me in some ways, but it wasn't consistent. I was terrible at math. So
give me an example of one book that spoke to you.
Of a book in high school.
Yeah, what's the first book that comes to mind from that era?
Finian's Wake, for some reason.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. Prep school, death. I don't know. And I kind of liked Shakespeare after I saw the plays, actually, right? I didn't like reading Shakespeare, I remember. But I don't even know.
For me, Dune is the first one that comes to mind.
You had to read Dune in high school?
No, that was my own. I loved
to read.
Oh,
okay. I was thinking of signed books that we had.
No, okay. Nah, the signed books.
Okay.
Science fiction as literature class, and that was the one thing I liked in high school.
Okay, then I'll go a different path for sure, and that would be Isaac Asimov's The Foundation series.
Oh yeah, the Foundation trilogy.
Right, which I actually recently reread, and I was like, this is just like politics in space. It's kind of it didn't hit me as it
was
hard.
More than that. I mean, the whole psychohistory thing, digging deep into, to me, understanding how you can predict the future. Right, exactly.
That made me, that really kind of interested me. If you knew enough about the past, you could predict the future, right?
Exactly.
By
the way, fun fact: I read the first book in Swedish, the second book in English, and the third book in German. Now that's my ego, myself kind of bragging, but it was an interesting experience doing it. But as a kid, I was like, I must have been 11, and somebody gave me that book. Stiftelsen is the name, foundation in Swedish.
Okay.
The foundation, Stiftelsen.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway,
I loved Ray Bradbury. Probably
yes.
my
favorite
of all time. I think Dandelion.
Well, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Those are the books that opened things up, right? That was the uncorking of the wine and letting it breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now, so then why did that? I want to go one step deeper, because I'm beginning to get the sense of where this view, this philosophy, if you will, is coming from, right? And the underpinning of it. So I got to go back to now the third why, and because I got distracted by the whole book thing. So when you became enraptured with really these ideas, and you were answering why that was so appealing to you. And what was this? What was the answer to that again? Sorry.
Why the ideas were so appealing to me was just
why you were so caught up by that phase in life where this gentleman, this person had sort of opened that up to you to dive in that way into study and thought.
Yeah. Because again, I was given all of this in an academic setting. So it was in a place that I similarly had a academically negative experience with. I went to school, you know, to socialize, right, to hang out, to like that was why I loved school. Had nothing to do with the books and what we learned there. And then so all of a sudden I was given this way of thinking that I didn't even know existed, right? And to me it was sort of mesmerizing that that human beings could have this kind of these kind of insights and have this kind of very honest, open connection to things, or this grappling with trying to understand what it was to be a human being. And I thought that vulnerability was so beautiful, and that it made me be more of a human myself, or made me be more honest with myself, and allowed me to be more of myself, which again, I think is the point of a good education, is to get to understand you and your relationship to the world all the better. And that for the first time, academically or even otherwise, because we grew up Roman Catholic, and Roman Catholic, Catholicism, it was all about CCD and church on Sundays, and the sacraments and all of that stuff. And but it was more of at least my experience with it was more of a kind of do as you're told, don't ask questions. Here's, it was just another version of school so far as I was concerned. And I didn't really have a deep appreciation for Catholicism or the Christian faith in general, really until I got to study it from an academic lens. So it kind of brought like this other part of my life sort of into focus as well. This part, again, that because when you're small, you're born into a religion, you're born into a society, you're given all these things, you're told who you are before you get a chance to actually ask the question of who am I, right? You're told all of the stuff about you, you're given a narrative about yourself. And so that helped me to kind of bring some focus into it. And it was really, really interesting to be able to have a different appreciation for myself, my faith, again, my relationship to the world, even academia itself and its point and purpose. I didn't know if I was going to be graduating high school, much less attending college thereafter. And I, as you mentioned, went on to get a couple of degrees, all in this field. I'm still a terrible student, I would imagine. I did study for the GREs and got a pretty dang good score on the math also, which I was really happy with myself for that. But I would imagine that I'm still a bad student if you were to plot me in, a traditional classroom setting right now, because I'm such a different kind of thinker. But different doesn't mean bad, right? And so it taught me that different was okay also.
Yeah. So from what I'm hearing, is it fair to say that you found this is another analogy. It's probably nowhere near as good as the cancer one that you liked, but you found yourself inside an onion, and somebody else helped you strip those onion layers off. You found yourself inside the system of systems, and in kind of in a straitjacket in a way that you were not able to really engage with reality. And suddenly you found yourself being able to engage with reality, going deep into that reality. However, it's like you're drilling through the onion layers, right? Because in philosophy, you're dealing with the ideas, but you're also taking them and looking at them in an abstract way rather than just going along with them.
That is a really good analysis. I think that is spot on.
So you're examining each layer of the onion and then saying, oh, I don't need that one anymore. What's next?
Yeah.
But you're working your way back out from inside the onion of the society that you were born into, and the ideas that surrounded you, the systems that surrounded you, which weren't serving you. Yeah. As a person, as an individual.
Absolutely. And I came to grapple with this at, I think the age that a lot of people do. And I just found that this mode of thinking also gave me access to almost like not all of human experience, but a lot of different touch points along the human experiential line, because I wasn't, again, then pigeonholed into, well, I'm from this religion, and it's okay to be from a particular religion that you identify with. That's totally fine. If that works for you, that's great. But for me, because I hadn't really connected, to any one thing, this allowed me to connect kind of to all of it in a way that I felt like I didn't have access to or understanding of at the time. Not that I have a great understanding of any of it now per se, but at least now I know that I'm capable of stripping away my own preconceptions and biases and notions about things, and just digesting information and then grappling with that as it is. And that's really what I learned. I didn't learn, I always say this, and I'm the terrible memorizer of facts, which is probably why I did, so badly in school, in traditional school anyways. I'm terrible at rote memorization, but I enjoy creative thinking, and philosophy and should be about teaching people how to think. And so should education, period. Should be teaching people how to think, not what to think, or ideas about things. Because when you're able to think for yourself or in your own way, and when you're able to saturate with information in an unbiased way, that is really the key to unlocking any information that is put in front of you.
So I want to read a quote here, and I'm actually looking up a song to see if I can play it. I may get me in trouble with copyright or whatever, but it's the quote is, hang on, let me just, or at least I want to be able to tell people. I want to make sure this song, it's a little bit obscure. I'll read the quote here in a second. I'm trying to see if people can find it.
It's not by P. Diddy, is it? That's probably taboo to play right now.
Sorry, by what?
So by P. Diddy?
No. This is a quote from from the Baha'i writings, Baha'u'llah. It's hidden word number 40 from the Persian. It's very short. O my servant, free thyself from the fetters of this world, and loose thy soul from the prison of self. Seize thy chance, for it will come to thee no more. Kind of like seize the day, carpe diem, but at a much deeper level.
I was like, say seize or cease by chance, but seize. Yeah.
Seize, grab, carpe diem. Mm-hmm. O my servant, free thyself from the fetters of this world, and loose thy soul from the prison of self. Seize thy chance, for it will come to thee no more. So, talking about the purpose of this phase of existence, there is potentially, based on this quote, I wasn't thinking of this earlier, but we're born into this material world when we're given a sense of self. We talked about desire at some point in this conversation. Eve desired that fruit. It says she desired that fruit. This word desire is interesting in the story because later God is talking to Cain before he kills Abel, and he says, sin desires you. Right? So Eve desired the forbidden fruit and she took it, and it was sin, disobedience. And now that same sin desired Cain. And interestingly, there's so many layers in that story. The curse on Eve, if you want to call it a curse, the outcome of doing that was you shall have pain in childbirth. And this is often, taken physically, women have pain in childbirth. It also is sometimes referred to as Christ, what he would have. But I think her firstborn son, the outcome of the childbirth, killed her second-born son. Do you talk about pain in childbirth for a mother to have your firstborn son kill your second-born son? And this desire that she had is later the desire that sin has for Cain. And God says to Cain, sin desires you. It's at the very door, but you shall rule over it. Right? So in one sense, we're given this sense of self and these ideas and these concepts that we grow up in, and we're inside the onion. And we have to free ourselves from the prison of self during this phase of our existence. is maybe one way to look at this. And I'm not trying to give the answer or anything like that. I'm just being with this conversation and sharing thoughts that have come as a result of this conversation.
Yeah.
Here's a comment from, it's a long one, from Finally Free Store. If you put it into perspective, we are but a needle on a record player. I love that because we love music so much, right? Barely touching it. That's our lifespan, right where the needle touches the album in comparison to the beginning and the end. Of course, nobody who's under 30 understands what this is, right? Because they don't know what a needle is on a record. Actually, it's a new phase. It's coming back in, right? So this is an interesting thought here from the audience.
Certainly.
Well, Joe, we're going to come back here. Well, no, let's go to your final thoughts now, and then I'll play the sneak peek for next week. So Joe, I've just shared sort of my being with this conversation and what's come to me, but I want you to definitely have the last word here and sort of sum up or wrap up any thoughts that you have that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap this up tonight.
Yeah, no, for me, I think that connection that we have with what is, it's so important to understand why we're focusing on what we're focusing on. It's so important to understand that the beliefs that we have, we don't frequently really know or acknowledge why we have them. The ideas that we have about the world, about ourselves, aren't explored by us as frequently as they probably need to be, for sure. We absolutely need to ensure that we have outlets and ways by which we're able to have an honest conversation with ourselves, and get outside of our own heads and think about and reflect on some things that might be worth reflecting on, and there sure are a lot of them. Again, things that this is why journaling can be so important, or having a conversation with somebody who you really know and trust. And there are a lot of people who do this, very, very well. And yet still, I think you have to create and allow a space for yourself by which you have this honest conversation about the ideas that you possess, why you have them, and if they continue to work for you, and why or why not, and what are you trying to achieve through that understanding, and what do you want for yourself, what do you want for your life, and how is the current way that you're living either getting you closer or further from those desires.
How's that working out for you? In other words,
right? Yeah. How you doing?
Yeah.
Good? Yeah.
Yeah. Have that conversation with yourself in a very open way, and honestly reflect, and strip out those layers of the onion. Free oneself from the fetters of self and the fetters of this world and its illusions, right? Somebody wrote false evidence appearing real, the definition of fear earlier in the chat. Mm-hmm. So, Joe, I don't know if there were any comments that you saw that you wanted to circle back and quickly touch on, or if I think we covered a number of them. I'm not saying there is one, but just want to make sure if you thought of one that you wanted to cover, that we have.
Again, from Peace on Earth, it says, how do we distinguish ideas from reality? That was really, the main comment that kind of stuck with me, because again, ideas are reality. Everything's a reality is the whole point, right? Anything that you create becomes a reality. Everything is, and once you bring something to bear, then it's a reality like any other thing. So why is it there? So why are your thoughts what they are? And do they have valor? Do they have merit? do they have a place, and why do you have them again? So
yeah, to sort of manifest this, you are creating an idea. You're creating a reality through that idea. It's like a house, a room that you can be in, and to your point a few moments ago, look at that and ask yourself, is this house helping me, or have I created a prison for myself? Are these years ago, this might seem strange, an Anthony Robbins series actually helped me, 30 Days to Personal Power. I'm not advocating Anthony Robbins as a solution to anything here, but he caused me to question certain aspects of belief that I had. He made me, through his series 30 Days to Personal Power, ask a whole lot of questions about why I was holding myself back. And I was able to identify a few false ideas and false concepts through that series. But you can get that through a number of places. Of course, he was very gifted actually at challenging people in certain areas of their life, related to success, whatever. You could unpack that as well. But the point is, and your friend and mentor, or mentor then friend perhaps, that helped you get on the path to philosophical study. At points in life, somebody can help us with that wake up call to reflect and rip off a Band-Aid or two that's been holding us back.
Again, that reflection is so important, right? And what is it that helps you to reflect or causes you to have that pause? That's so important and so necessary, and to have those outlets are easier than I think we think that they are. And yet, kind of incorporating that, because it's not a part of our generally, a daily routine for most people, because again, we're not taught how to do this. We're generally speaking taught to just accept the way things are and don't question stuff. That this is what it is, and this is how it is, and this is, you can try and do something about it, or but your being, your thoughts, your actions don't really cause any change or make much of an impact. Where that's really not true, because anything can happen. You have to be the one that allows it to affect you, and you have to examine again why it is that you let certain things affect you in the ways that they do. Like you said, is this house that you're building, is it a prison, or is it something that's getting you to where it is that you truly want to be? And where is it that you truly want to be? And why do you want to be there? And what's the point of that, right? And I appreciate yeah. Well, right. Because, and again, this goes back to the point of, we don't understand the things that we think we understand. Or we don't even understand why we think that we understand them in that way. And so you have to get very clear on your own definitions and your own, and the beliefs that cause those definitions. Here's something crazy. Nothing can affect you unless you have a definition about it. Nothing hits you. Nothing emotionally, psychologically.
Yeah. And speaking of books, right?
And definitions are concepts, by the way. Sorry. Yeah.
Right. Speaking of books, Richard Frankel, Man's Search for Meaning, right? For anyone who's read that book, talking about Holocaust, those who experienced the Holocaust and Holocaust survivors, and how their search for meaning, even in the most unbelievably horrific circumstances throughout human history, that people have found meaning, people have assigned meaning to things. And that's a very positive example of the lotus flower in the dirtiest of dirty mud, right? Somehow creating beauty. But of course, you could also live in the most beautiful palace and create misery by you imbuing, a negative meaning into things. The power of conceptualization is unbelievable. I mean, you're trying to get at something even deeper than that, but that's an example, perhaps, of this.
It's a really good one.
Is it a mansion, or is it is it a prison that we're building here with our ideas and our concepts?
And Viktor Frankl's, ideas.
I called him Richard. Yeah, thank you, Victor.
Oh, did you call him
Frankl? I think I called him. I've been calling him Richard Frankel, and it didn't sound right. It's Viktor Frankl. Thank you.
It's Victor. Whatever. I didn't hear it. But it's such a poignant example, that book. Because what more destitute, dire situation literally could you even imagine? I'm not sure that you could imagine a worse one than what that reality was. And yet the extrapolations from that on positive notes are so truly miraculous. I don't just say they're no, they were actual miracles of the human spirit and the endurance thereof, right? And that someone could then take that all that pain and all that difficulty and expound that to us to learn something about that. Again, that just speaks to the power, grace, and indestructibility of what it is to be a human being.
Yeah. And I got to throw one more little music quote out there from one of the greatest sort of very not well-known artists, Graham Parker, who with Graham Parker and the Rumor issued Squeezing Out Sparks, which was just an unbelievable album at that moment in time, and his song Protection. And the lyric is, "It's not the knife through the heart that tears you apart. It's the thought of someone sticking it in." Right?
Yeah.
Your point about we can go through anything and have it not affect us, or we could go through, a paper cut and reflect on why and how somebody did that to us.
It's kind of like Roosevelt's the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, right? The idea is going to be far worse than the reality of it. And again, you cannot, and I think that this is truly like bonkers insane, is that nothing affects you if you don't have a definition about it. You can't be affected by it in any way, shape, or form, positive or negative. That there's nothing that because definitions cause your beliefs, cause you to have concepts and ideas about what that thing is. And your relationship to it. So that's where I say, if you can strip away all those things and just observe things as they are, without definitions, without beliefs, without your past, without your interactions, then you have true observation in and of itself. And then you have something that is pure and untouchable. And again, then what are you? Then you are just pure observation yourself, which causes all sorts of other questions about who and what we really are as human beings and as a consciousness, period.
Yep. So thank you, Joe. I'm going to go now quickly to the sneak peek. I hope you have got a couple minutes. We can stick around and chat after the show's over, but I want to share the sneak peek of next week's show with the audience and with you. This is a gentleman that, unlike most shows, I actually had the opportunity to pre-record this show this morning with this gentleman, because he's in the UK. And so we wanted to get the show in the can. He cannot be here live with us. So I've already recorded the show this morning, and it's just amazing. And it's a great bookend to what we've been talking about here, Joe, because this is a man who, that sort of same purity of thought and experience of his own experience and understanding who he is, but now also not just being an observer, but then taking concrete action, as you're doing as well with Middle Tree, right? But his focus is a little different and unique and really powerful. I mean, I'm very excited, as I was about this show, about next week's show. So we're going to go to that sneak peek, and for the audience, we will then end with that and see you all here next week, 8 p.m. for Created in the Image of God. Here's a taste of what's coming next week. And Joe, thank you so much for being on, and I hope we can have you back soon, perhaps, to talk about the release of that second book, which is imminent. And I know I've been honored to be invited to work with you on that book, and we will be working on that for the audience to know over the next coming weeks to get that book out there.
I really appreciate having me on, Wade. Always, really, it's a joy, and it's truly an honor. And I love to be able to talk in such an open format about this stuff. Peace on Earth said that this was a psychedelic experience, so I think that's a good thing. I hope it wasn't too heady, but it's really important to kind of break down. And thank you for giving me a format to do that.
Yeah. Hey, Peace on Earth. Get his book, A Philosophical War. you won't be disappointed. And Christine, sorry you missed it, but it will be it's recorded on the various sites. You're on Facebook. It's also on the YouTube channel. People are watching this show from different channels. So, Christine, you missed it. Don't worry. It will be posted immediately after the show and available to watch later. So here we go, the sneak peek for next week's show.
Hello, everyone. It's Wade Franson, host of Created in the Image of God, with a very early morning sneak peek into episode 122 with Krish Kandiah. Krish Kandiah was recently awarded the Order of the British Empire by King Charles III, and it was the first honors list that the king did after his inauguration. We're going to talk to Krish about hospitality as a spiritual practice. Welcome to the studio, Chris.
Thanks, Wade. Lovely to be with you. Sorry it's so early for you.
And well, no worries. My voice is cracking a little bit. I just got my Yeti coffee here for this sneak peek. So Krish, we talked in preparing for the show about your work, and tell us a little bit about what our guests can expect to hear when they tune in on October 29th.
Well, I know this is a crucial time in the US election season, so we're going to be talking all things faith, society, hospitality, kindness. What does it look like to welcome vulnerable people into our homes, whether they be children in the foster care system or asylum seekers or refugees? I'm going to show how that might be one of the keys to understanding the Christian faith.
Wonderful. And you are focused on this in your life's work. Share with the audience in this sneak peek what it is that your focus is in terms of your work.
So my work and my life kind of overlap. I'm married. I have 6 children. 3 of them are through birth and 3 are through fostering and adoption. And it was entering into the world of being a foster parent that opened my eyes to so many needs within the British society, particularly around vulnerable children, but later unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. I've been very involved in the Homes for Ukraine program, which has seen about 200,000 Ukrainians come to the UK and find safety and welcome, as well as helping Afghans who had to flee after the fall of Kabul. So my world is really intertwined with this idea of hospitality as the key to understanding the heart of God and what it means to live out the Christian life.
Well, I can't wait to dive into that as we record the episode, but that's enough for the sneak peek. So to the audience, you don't want to miss Krish Kandiah, Hospitality as a Spiritual Practice, which will be airing October 29th at 8 p.m. Central. See you there.